Hey there friends, thanks for joining me again, and this is going to be probably the last video that I do that pertains to our house specifically, the decisions we made, the move we made, that sort of thing. I understand that it's probably getting to be somewhat of a boring topic for some of you, but it's the last thing I have to talk about and answer questions that people have still asked and I haven't really addressed yet. So I really do want to talk about this, why it is we chose rentals, and how much this house actually costs us. So if you would, just stick with me for one last video and then we'll move on to, the more normal videos that I normally put out. My marker was also, dying when I was putting this together, so hopefully you can see this okay, and if not, I'll be explaining it anyway. So the first thing I want to talk about is our house and the rental that we chose to do. So instead of selling our last house when we moved, we decided to go ahead and rent it out. So we have that as a rental, our old house. And I'm not going to be using actual figures here, obviously, for personal reasons, but it'll all make sense still. So we have, the rental income that we make from that, and then we have our rental number 2, which is the apartment inside of our house that we have upstairs, of course, as you saw from the tour video. And so that has income of its own. Okay, so when you put the two together, because a lot of people have asked, how much the rental income from the apartment makes, how much of a difference does it make on our mortgage, what percentage, that sort of stuff. Or why we would keep the old house, what kind of, impact does that have on our income toward the mortgage, of course. So when you add the two incomes that we have, the new incomes that we have, because by moving out of our old house, now that becomes an income maker, and by moving into this new house with the apartment, that has an income. We have 2 rentals that we've started on our own this time, and so we have that. When you add them together, the 2 of them are higher than our mortgage payment, which makes our housing costs essentially free. When we have the 2 incomes from the rentals that pay for, the whole thing, obviously we don't have to make that mortgage payment on our own, which sounds really cool. But here's even better than that. There's actually an overage. The 2 incomes from the mortgages or the rent together, and then when you take the total amount minus the mortgage, of course, we end up with an overage, which is a few $100s. And so there is more, of course, housing costs associated than just having a mortgage. Our old house, because it is paid off, we do still have to pay taxes and insurance on it, of course. And then this house is going to have taxes and insurance to have to pay, and that's not included in the mortgage. We chose not to have that stuff escrowed, so it's not included in our mortgage, and we have to pay that. So we have 2 sets of property taxes and 2 sets of insurances to have to pay for the houses as well. Here's the cool thing though, when you take that overage that we have and you times it by 12 months in a year, we end up with a figure that I'm pretty sure will cover the taxes and insurance. Now, I'm not entirely sure because here we have the property taxes get reevaluated every other year, and this is the year when they're going to be renewed and get the new value. So I know what last year's value is, and I know that they're probably going to go up some, but I'm not entirely sure by how much. So my best guess, without knowing until probably February sometime, and then when we get our new property tax notices, I'm pretty sure that it's going to cover the cost, but at the moment I'm not entirely sure. That's why I say that. So this figure should cover the vast majority, if not all, of those property taxes and insurances for both houses, which is really cool. So basically, long story short, with the rentals that we have, with having moved out of our other house and then keeping it as an asset instead of selling it, and then moving into a house with an apartment instead of just an ordinary house, we get to live here basically with our 15-year mortgage for free. However, that's not good enough for me because I have a debt repayment plan in mind where I want to be out of debt within 10 years. I've always tried to stay out of consumer debt, that sort of thing. But when it comes to mortgages, I really do want to get myself out from under those as well. I think a lot of the major financial gurus out there don't put enough of an earnest, a need to get out of those mortgages. People will say, oh, as long as you have at least 10 years until retirement, you don't really need to pay them off and that sort of stuff. I actually disagree with that. And a lot of people will say, I'm debt free, and they'll be all excited and do their little debt free, excited thing or whatever. But I feel like that's kind of it's not entirely honest if you still have a mortgage, because mortgage is still debt. So to claim we're out of debt just because we have no car payments or credit cards, but still having this huge mortgage looming over us is just not, it's not honest. So anyway, I really do believe that we should be making getting out of debt a priority for us. This isn't, any kind of judgmental thing toward anyone else or anything. This is just what I'm saying, how I disagree with, the major financial gurus and how we've done things differently. Anyway, so moving on. So that makes our housing cost free. We could technically live here for the 15 years and just live here for free. And then after that, the house would be paid off. However, if you'll remember from the budgeting video where I showed how we actually budget, my husband makes income and then we live off of that income. And then I make a part-time income as well. And all of that part-time income that I was making was going toward the down payment to be able to buy a house. Well, now that we don't have to be saving toward the down payment to buy a house, we're actually going to take all of that income and put it in the mortgage. And additionally, like the video I just talked about, my goals for 2017, we're going to try and put 11% toward the mortgage this year. And the reason I want to dig so deep is because it is our first year in the mortgage. So the more money that we can devote to the mortgage, the better, which kind of makes things a little bit stretched, but we're going to try our best. So what we're actually planning on doing is putting all of the rent money toward the mortgage, all of it, including this overage. So all of the money that we get from both of our rentals, even though that's higher than the mortgage, we're going to put all of that money toward the mortgage, and then all of my part-time income that I was putting towards saving for the house toward the mortgage as well. If we do that, if we put both of those extra incomes toward the mortgage, what it will actually do for us is get our house paid off in 8 years. Now, of course, this is a best case scenario because we really don't know what's going to come up in the future. Is someone going to totally wreck our house? That's possible. Renting is, it's a risk. It's a calculated risk that we have taken, but it's still a risk. And so obviously we have to account for that sort of thing. If somebody moves out and we have repairs that we need to do, we may end up with a vacancy, that sort of thing. So, again, this is best case scenario, assuming everything goes as perfectly as planned, and who knows what else could come up. We have a lot of more expenses now because we have 2 households that we have to take care of, whereas before, obviously, we just had the one. Our utilities are higher here. We drive older cars, and so that takes more maintenance and stuff like that. And so, obviously we're still trying to build up our homestead and other things that we want to do in addition to our needs. So there's a chance that things may not work out quite as we are hoping. And then the other thing that I'm a little bit worried about is that all this extra income is actually going to push us into another tax bracket. So that's a little bit, nerve-wracking as well. So I guess we'll have to wait out the year, see what the income actually works out to be, and then see how that works out. But yeah, that's our best case scenario if everything goes as planned and we are able to devote all of that rent money and all of, my money toward the mortgage for the whole time. It pays it off in 8 years. Really quickly though, because I do want to, address any questions that come up before we, before they come up actually, is a lot of people might say, well, if you sold your old house and you were to devote that money toward your new house, wouldn't that buy down your debt to where you wouldn't have to pay for so long? And the answer is yes, of course, we could have used the equity that we had from our old house toward the new house. However, the cool thing about this is that we retain our asset. In our area, houses are going up by leaps and bounds year after year. So keeping it is a better idea than selling it, because if we sell it for this much today and next year it's worth that, if we hold on to it in 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's worth, that, it would make more sense to hold on to the asset. And the cooler thing even than that is also that because we have retained our asset and moved into this house at the same time and kept it as a rental, not only, again, does it help us pay off our house faster, but once we are able to achieve having it paid off, with all this extra income and not having a mortgage to pay, feasibly, we could probably retire. That would be kind of cool. Retire around age 40. I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do. I'm taking it year by year here, but for the most part, this is just kind of, ideas that we're kicking around and things like that. So having 2 houses paid off and having all these rental incomes that we have, we could feasibly live off of it and not have to worry about living on, you know, some kind of government plan. I mean, obviously Social Security is probably not going to be around by the time that we retire, and, you know, or a company. And a lot of times people will work for a company for 20, 30, 40 years, retire, or they're coming close to their retirement age, you know, 2 or 3 years out, and then they find a reason to get rid of them so that they don't have to pay that, you know, pension, and then they're just out. So these people go all this time thinking they've got this, you know, thing to live on for their retirement, and then it's like a rug pulled out of them at the last minute. We're trying to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to try to, you know, provide for ourselves and not having to rely on a company or the government or anything else. We're trying to create this income on our own that, you know, is dependent on us and that we can't have the rug pulled out from under us on. Hopefully that makes sense. So there you go. Hopefully that answers all of your questions. Yes, we kept our old house. Yes, we're renting it out. That's our debt repayment plan. If we can really dig deep, which it's going to take digging deep in order to make this work out, we should be able to pay it off. And I'm nervous even saying that because I really don't know how the future is going to go. But it could be as, you know, early as 8 years from now. Hopefully it works out that way. We'll try and see. And so yeah, that's our plan. That's what we're gonna try and stick to. So anyway, hopefully this video was helpful to you. Thanks for joining me again. I'm Frugal Green Girl. Thanks for watching.